Today we're going to talk about trauma bonds and how to recognise and break traumatic bonds. My name is Jenny Rock. I am from Jenny Rock Coaching, and helping women leaving abusive relationships is what I do. And I do that with coaching and help them move past the problems that they have been dealing with and into their new lives. So part and parcel of that is trauma bonds, what they are and why we have them and what happens. And until we understand them better, they're never going to go away. So we need to understand what's happening so that we can actually help ourselves to heal. So I'm going to go through some information with you, and obviously if you have any comments, questions, pop them in the comments box, and we'll see if I can answer them for you. So when you leave an abusive relationship, it's not normally as simple as walking out the door, because not only have you got concerns about where to live and supporting yourself, and the possibility of being separated from your children or loved ones, you might feel tied to your partner, unable to get away, because this emotional attachment is known as a trauma bond, and it develops out of a repeated cycle of abuse, devaluation, and positive reinforcement. Now, that all sounds a bit kind of contradictory, but let me just say again, it's developed out of a repeated cycle of abuse, devaluation, and then positive reinforcement. And this will all start to make sense in a minute. So the trauma of abuse might create powerful feelings that you struggle to make sense of, especially when abuse alternates with kindness and intimacy. And it's only natural to develop a bond with someone who treats you with kindness. Many abusive relationships begin with what we call love bombing. It's a shower of affection and assurances of love, and oh my God, you're the best thing ever, and you're the most amazing person in their life. They've never met anybody like you. They can't live without you. They make you feel like you are their world. And when the abuse begins, it kind of takes you by surprise, because afterwards your partner might apologize and swear to change and insist that they were just upset, something triggered them. And these attempts to manipulate often succeed because you remember the early days of the relationship and you believe that they can be that person again, that person that is nice and kind and showers you with affection and love and, is amazing. And trauma bonding can also happen between a child and an abusive caregiver or another adult, or a hostage and a kidnapper, or a leader and the members of a cult. So this stuff isn't rare. This stuff happens a lot. But when you look at the different categories that it happens to, you think about how being abused by your partner is creating a trauma bond, the same as a cult leader and the followers in a cult. It's quite shocking, isn't it? So there are some signs of a trauma bond, because they can look a little bit different depending on the type of relationship that you have, but they tend to have a couple of main characteristics. And the first one is a cyclical nature, which means it just cycles around. So first of all, they depend on intermittent reinforcement. In other words, a cycle of abuse. So it's generally easier to leave a situation that's really bad, always bad, one where the abusive person never offers any kindness or concern for your well-being. And if you don't believe someone will ever change, you probably won't stick around. Because if all you're getting is bad, you're not going to stick it out. But in an abusive relationship, your partner occasionally does treat you well. And they might bring you gifts or call you their soulmate or take you out or urge you to relax and, treat you really nicely sometimes. And these gestures can be really confusing and disarming, especially if you see them and you think that they've changed. We've got through the bad bit and they've changed. And the second part of it is a power imbalance, because these bonds also release. Knew it was going to happen at some point today, but they also rest on an underlying imbalance of power. So in this dynamic, you might feel as though they control you to the point where you no longer know how to resist or break free. And even if you manage to leave the relationship, you might have a hard time breaking that bond without professional help. And you might feel incomplete or lost without them and eventually return. Is this sounding familiar, ladies? Now, you just do that because the abuse cycle is familiar and you don't know how to live without it yet. And yet being the operative word here. Now, there's some other key signs, and these are some other characteristics of trauma bonds. And you feel unhappy, and you may not even like your partner anymore, but you still feel unable to end things. When you do try and leave, you feel physically and emotionally distressed. When you say you want to leave, they promise to change, but make no efforts to actually do so. You fixate on the good days, using them as proof that they truly care. And you make excuses and defend their behaviour when others express concern. You continue to trust them and hope to change them. And you protect them by keeping abusive behaviour secret. Trauma bonds can linger. Even when the abuse happened long ago, you might struggle to stop thinking about someone who hurt you and feel the urge to reach out or try again. And here's a test that might help, although it's not completely conclusive. Ask yourself whether you would encourage a loved one to leave a similar relationship, and answer that honestly. And if you answer yes, but still feel powerless to leave your relationship, that's a good indicator of trauma bonding. Now, we need to look at why it happens. Now, people who haven't experienced abuse often struggle to understand why people remain in abusive relationships, and they might believe that you're perfectly capable of leaving. But in reality, though, the trauma bond that makes this extremely difficult, and people don't choose abuse. Nobody chooses to be abused. They also can't help the development of trauma bonds, which are driven by some pretty strong biological processes. So you have the freeze response, and everybody knows about fight or flight and your body's automatic response to any perceived threat. But maybe you're even aware that people respond to threats in 4 different ways, because there's not just fight or flight. There's flight or fight or flight, freeze and fawn. And when you face abuse or fear the possibility of future abuse, your brain recognizes what's coming and sends a warning to the rest of your body. So adrenaline and cortisol, which are the stress hormones, they flood in, jump-starting your survival instincts and triggering your emotions and your physical tension. And this is where the power imbalance comes into play, because if you don't feel as though you can safely escape or stand up to that person abusing you, freezing might seem like the best option so that you can stay. So that you stay. Not that you can stay, you stay. When thoughts of the abuse become too painful or difficult to bear, you choose to focus on the positive parts of your relationship and ignore or block the rest. And you might make excuses for them and justify their behaviour to rationalise your need to stay. And each repetition of the cycle can reinforce this sense of powerlessness and the seeming certainty that you will never be able to escape. You come to believe the false reality that they have constructed to control you, and you need them. They need you. You are nothing without them, and no one else cares. And these lies can chip larger and larger blocks from your identity and self-worth, tying you more tightly to the relationship. And hormones can be powerful reinforcers too, because hormones are involved. You only have to look at dopamine's role in addiction to find support for this, because dopamine has a similar function in trauma bonding. After an incident of abuse, the period of calm that often follows can ease your stress and fear. Apologies, gifts, or physical affection offered by the abusive person serve as rewards that help reinforce the rush of relief and trigger the release of dopamine. And since dopamine creates feelings of pleasure, it can strengthen your connection with the abuser. You want the dopamine boost, so you continue trying to make them happy to earn their affection. Physical affection or intimacy also prompts the release of oxytocin, another feel-good hormone, and that can further strengthen bonds. So not only does oxytocin promote connection and positive feelings, it can also ease fear. And physical affection from an abusive partner then might dim distress and emotional pain, making it easier to focus on the positive treatment. So when we talk about breaking the bond, people who experienced abuse in childhood often feel drawn to similar relationships in adulthood, since the brain already recognizes the highs and lows of the cycle. And a history of trauma can make it even harder to break trauma bonds, but you can learn to stop this cycle. And I've got some tips that can help you. And the first thing is to know what you're dealing with. Recognizing the existence of the bond is an important first step. When it comes to abuse, of course, this is often easier said than done. And to find evidence for abuse and recognize signs of trauma bonding, here are some things to try, okay? Keep a journal, write down things that happen each day, and that can help you begin to identify patterns and notice problems with behavior that may not have seemed abusive in the moment. And when abuse does happen, note what happened and whether your partner said anything afterwards to excuse it. And then consider the relationship from another perspective. Pretend you're reading about your relationship in a book. And it's often easier to examine negative events when you have some level of detachment. Pay attention to the small details that make you uncomfortable or give you pause. Do they feel healthy to you? Now, next one's a bit of a hard one. Talk to loved ones. It's not easy. It's not easy. I fully accept it's not easy. I found it incredibly hard to open up about abuse. And maybe you got angry or brushed off friends and family when they expressed concern in the past. And loved ones can offer essential perspective. They can, but you have to be ready to hear it. You need to challenge yourself to listen and to make a real effort to consider the accuracy of their observations and don't just brush it off. And avoid self-blame, because believing that you caused the abuse or brought it on yourself can make it harder to exercise your autonomy, effectively keeping you in the relationship. Remind yourself that abuse is never your fault, never your fault, no matter what you may or may not have done. And no matter how deeply you feel loneliness or a life without them, no matter how many times you have already gone back, you do deserve better. Replacing self-criticism and blame with affirmations and positive self-talk can help this truth to begin to take hold. And if you do manage to escape from a person that you are trauma bonded to, cut off contact completely. Once you make a decision to leave, disrupt the cycle completely by stopping all communication. And if you co-parent, this might not be possible, but a therapist or a coach or a counsellor can help you establish a plan to maintain only necessary contact, or you can use a third party for contact. You know, if their sister or their brother is a neutral zone, you can ask them to run interference, and basically all contact goes through them. So another thing to make sure that you do is to create a physical distance by finding a safe place to stay, such as with a relative or a friend. And also think about changing your phone number and email address if possible. And the reason that we say change your phone number, you can block them, but they can dial you from another number, or they can message you from another number. They can message you from another email address. So there's no ends to the lengths that they will go to get you back under control. So by changing your number and changing your email address, they don't know it, they don't have it, they can't contact you. And if you can't change your number, block them completely, and they might get through with a new number. But if anybody phones you with a number that you don't recognize, you can ignore them. Just don't answer those calls, let it go to voicemail. They might insist that they will change, and they will go to therapy, and they will do anything as long as you'll just come back. And these promises, they feel really tempting, but you have to remind yourself of how many times that they have already promised to change. And when you take action to begin weakening that trauma bond on your own, these bonds tend to hold fast. They are sunk in pretty deep. Just imagine them as like vampire claws. It's just holding on to you. And on your own, trying to break free of those claws is really, really hard. I won't say impossible. It is possible to do it on your own, but it takes a long time. And if you have help, then you have somebody else there that can loosen that grip, that can help you take those claws out one by one until the claws are all gone and you can run free back into the wild. And you can talk about the patterns of abuse that drive trauma bonding, and the insight can often give you a lot of clarity, but you can also explore the factors that are fueling the bond. You can work on setting boundaries. You can learn skills for building healthy relationships, because what you did have was not healthy. You can confront that self-blame and self-criticism, and you can develop a self-care plan, and you can address the mental health systems related to long-term trauma and abuse, which quite often can turn into a complex PTSD situation. Because if it's been ongoing for years, it's not just a one-off incident. PTSD normally refers to a one-off kind of incident, whereas complex PTSD means that you are being traumatized again and again and again, which is what the trauma bonding basically is. And it's generally recommended, if you're going to work with a therapist, make sure they're trauma informed. Professionals who specialize in recognizing and treating post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly complex PTSD and the after effects of abuse, can often have the biggest impact for people working to overcome this specific trauma. And obviously there are resources everywhere to help you escape from domestic abuse. And you have your local domestic abuse service. You can Google your town and put domestic abuse next to it, or domestic abuse in your town, and you will get a list of resources come up. Just contact any of them. In an emergency situation, if you are in fear of your life, if you are in fear of danger, phone the police. Do not hesitate, just call the police. There are national organisations. You've got the National Domestic Violence Hotline in the US that offers free confidential support. Again, just Google National Domestic Violence Hotline. They've got numbers that you can phone, or they can do it by chat. You've got Women's Aid in the UK. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of the ones in Canada and Australia and New Zealand, etc. But I can guarantee if you Google domestic violence and your area, you will find something that will help you. And these places, they have resources. They can offer legal advice, they can offer counselling, they can offer support groups, they can offer accommodation, they can offer financial support. Depending on the size of the organisation, they can offer part, some, or all of these. So there is help there, but you have to be willing to take it. And you have to be ready to make that change. Because until you're ready, you're just going to keep going back. So you have to reach that point where you're done. You've had enough. You're absolutely done, and you don't want it anymore. And this is something that I specialize in my work with clients. I deal with clients that are escaping narcissistic abuse relationships, domestic abuse situations. And there's a couple of different ways that I do it. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's in a group setting, a group therapy setting, a group coaching session. Sorry, not therapy. I don't do therapy. That's looking back. I do coaching. That's looking forward. But group coaching, and it works miracles. Honest to God, it brings me to tears just to see the progress that my ladies make. And we create our own little family. They support each other, because nobody outside of the situation understands. If somebody hasn't gone through it, they have no concept of how bad it can be. So by having this little band of women that support each other, that they're from all over the place. There's English students. There's clients from America. There's I've had clients from all over the world, and they come together in a group and they support each other. So when one has got a really important court date coming up, the others will be on the group chat, supporting them. One's having a wobble, they'll put it in the group chat, and immediately there's somebody in there that will help them. So if you have this situation, if you are trauma bonded and you need help, then please reach out to whatever makes you feel comfortable, whether it be to me, to a national service, to a local service, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be me. I'm not here saying you have to work with me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm here if you want me. But I'm also saying that there is resources aplenty wherever you live. And if you are willing and ready to take them, then they are waiting for you. Okay, so you can view this as maybe an opportunity to come to terms with actually what is really going on in your life, and give you an opportunity to think about how much longer you're going to tolerate this situation, because there is a way out. You are not trapped.